welcome. We probably have more people coming in, but I'd like to just quickly introduce Frank Ostaseski, and then we'll do just a few minutes of meditation, let people come in. So Frank is a Zen priest. He was a co-founder of the Zen Hospice Project in the late 1980s, and he's a pioneer in the end-of-life care and training. And with his Metta Institute, started about 20 years ago, he trains people how to be with those who are passing, those who are dying. Frank himself has tremendous experience in that field, and just tremendous heart and soul and love. And I'm very excited to have him here with us. So thank you, Frank, for joining us. This is just such a treat, such a pleasure and honor to have you. All right, let's begin. Frank, please unmute yourself if you would.
Oh, good. I'm happy to be with you all. Nice to be here with this evening, kind of explore this territory together. I'm a little tender, actually, because my brother died on Friday. And I just flew in this afternoon from New York from being with him and navigating what I sometimes call the business of dying, the enormous number of tasks that we are required to follow after someone dies at a time when we're in the midst of our own grief and probably feeling our most vulnerable. So I'm just coming from all that to be here with you tonight. I'm still a little shocked, to be honest. Jon wanted us to focus our discussion tonight on the 5 invitations. They were originally developed as a kind of guide, for being with people who are facing end of life. But I've come to think of them as, bottomless practices that can be continually deepened and explored. I don't think they have much value as theories, actually. I think to be understood, to be embodied, they have to be lived and realized through action. I call them invitations because an invitation is basically a request to participate, right? To attend an event. If I invite you to my house for dinner, well, your job is to show up. Except the event here we're talking about is our lives. And these invitations are, for me at least, an encouragement to be fully present for every aspect of it. We'll try and a little bit later include them in our discussion, but I wanted to just say a few things first, sort of plant some seeds, if you will. And the first is really on my heart and mind because of just being with my brother. It is that if we imagine that at the time of our dying, we're going to have the physical strength, the emotional stability, the mental clarity to do the work of a lifetime, this is a kind of ridiculous gamble. So I think the time for the conversation is now. A lot of us, if I were to ask you to raise your hand, most of us would say, death will come later. If I asked you that question, when will death come? You'd say later. My brother and I certainly did. My brother lived with ALS, what's called Lou Gehrig's disease, for about 20 years. A diagnosis of that usually takes one's life in 2 to 5 years. But he had some version of it that allowed him to live for 20 years. And he lived with this illness and its debilitating nature with amazing creativity and acceptance of this changing conditions. And we all thought that one day the illness would eventually take his life. A few weeks ago, he began to feel shortness of breath, and So he went to the doctor, and the doctor put him into the hospital, thinking it might be the ALS rather, or it could be a heart condition. They did a CAT scan and found a big mass in his lungs. This was 2 weeks ago. And then Tuesday, a biopsy was being done to sort of determine if it was cancer, and if so, what type, etc. And 3 days later, he died. We imagine death will come later. No sense worrying about it too much now, Later gives us that comfortable illusion, doesn't it? That kind of safe distance between us and death. But we know from our practice, right, that constant change is not later. It's right now. Impermanence is the essential truth woven into the very fabric of existence. It's inescapable, perfectly natural, our most constant companion. I mean, where is this morning's breakfast? Where's last night's lovemaking? Where's my blonde hair gone? Intellectually, we get this. We understand this. We get it that treasured vase that our mother gave us will one day fall off the shelf. That our car will break down. That the roof will leak. That the people we love will die. And I think our work is to move that understanding from our intellect and nestle it deep in our hearts. Impermanence is humbling. I mean, we all pretty much agree that life is in constant flux, right? Our practice informs us of that way. We know that seasons come and go, relationships begin and end, trends peak, But we still sometimes cling to this illusion that we ourselves are solid things. Solid things moving through an ever-changing world. It's a bit of an arrogant perspective, isn't it? Everything's changing except me. But we're mistaken. We're not the nurse or the software engineer or the barista or the Zen practitioner listening to this talk, at least not in ways we imagine. Not separate and apart. We're at once here and disappearing. I was in Japan a few years ago with my friend Joan Halifax. We were leading a group, and it was right at the heart of, right at the peak of cherry blossom season. And, the hills are covered in these delicate, beautiful flowers that last just a short while. And it's extraordinary to be there. And then I teach in northern Idaho a lot. And outside the cabin where I stay, there are these little tiny blue flax flowers that last for a single day. Why are those cherry blossoms, those blue flax flowers, so much more magnificent than plastic flowers? I mean, isn't it the fragility of them, the brevity of their life, the uncertainty of their life that captivates us and invites us into their beauty and with a sense of wonder? John mentioned that I was one of the co-founders of the Zen Hospice Project. It was a extraordinary coming together of people. And we worked mostly with people who were living in terrible conditions, alcoholics and prostitutes and people living on the margins of our society, many of them living on the streets. They were often angry about their loss of control. They didn't trust much in the system or even in humanity, actually. And so for some, dying was a great gift. They made reconciliations with long-lost family members, or they freely expressed or received the love that they'd always hoped for. And others, they turned toward the wall in withdrawal and hopelessness and depression, and they never came back again. And all of them were my teachers. Habits of our life have a powerful momentum that propel us right into the moment of our dying. So the obvious question that arises is, what habits do we want to create? I mean, suppose we stop compartmentalizing death, cutting it off from life, and we regarded it as this incredible opportunity for transformation. Might we then, in this life, turn toward death as a master teacher and say, how then shall we live? You see, what I find, and I want to end here, is that when we keep death close at hand, right at our fingertips, it reminds us not to hold on too tightly. And maybe we take ourselves and our ideas, particularly our treasured beliefs, a little more lightly, not so seriously. And I think that helps us to be kinder and gentler to ourselves and one another. Dying's inevitable and intimate. And I've seen ordinary people that don't profess to have an inner life or spiritual practice or any of these things, yet they come to these insights at the end of their life that help them to emerge as something larger and more expansive, more real than the small self they've taken themselves to be. And that's not a fairy tale, and it's not a good Buddhist story. This regularly occurs for many people in the final months, the final weeks, the final days, the final moments of their life. Too late, you might say. I would agree. But here's the thing. It's not about how long they enjoyed that experience, or it's about the possibility that such transformation exists. And if it exists then, it exists now. So we can harness our awareness of death to appreciate the fact that we're alive, to encourage us toward self-exploration, to clarify our values and generate positive action in the world. So I don't have the 7 steps to a good death, but I'm always curious to explore, as I am this evening, well, how does an awareness of death help us to live more fully? That's what I hope we'll kind of explore tonight. So John, I think I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to plant some seeds, and now I'm curious to just have a conversation with you. Yeah.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you for sharing about your brother, and I just can't help but want to ask, how are you doing? You yourself, you had a terrible accident, breaking your hip just a couple months ago, and how are you doing?
Well, thank you for asking. I think I'm okay. I'm, as I said a moment ago, I'm shocked and I feel tender. And I was a little surprised that my brother died as quickly as he did. But I've also had I've had a lot of time and a lot of sitting at the bedside of people who died, and they taught me well. They taught me well. And as we get older, right? And I don't know if it's happening to you, John, but I'm getting older. I don't know if you are, but these things occur. Bones break and we fall down, and our brains get whacked and become a bit scrambled, as mine is. And what happens? We include it. Hopefully we learn from it a little bit, but we include it. And so I think I'm grieving. We're starting to grieve. And I think we're hardly human if we don't grieve. Hardly human. So I don't feel much of a need to do anything with it so much, except to let myself meet all its faces. Yeah. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's
One
on your
thing-
heart and mind?
Yeah. Thank you. One thing in reading your book that I really enjoyed was your teaching of how to be with people who are dying and have faith that they will teach us how to be with them. And you give some examples of, for example,
Yeah, I
student
mean,
sitting with a teacher and etc.
yeah. Well, I don't have a way that I think we should die. I just don't. I don't hold much stock in this idea of a good death, actually. I think it's hard enough to die, actually, without us setting up agendas or standards about how people should do it. And then they wind up feeling like a terrible failure if they didn't do it well, if they weren't sitting in Zazen when they died. Yeah. So one of the things I try and do is be with people just as they are. And I try and inquire and discover, who is that, that's there? And what happens is I find if I just pay careful attention, more and more of them shows up, Like one of the things I always talk about, John, is I ask people, what do you think is going to happen when you die? Not because I know or I think there's a right answer to this, but I think everybody's got a story about what's going to happen if we die. And I think it's useful to know something about that story because I think it shapes the way in which we die. We had a guy in the hospice, he was the president of the California Atheist Association. I didn't even know there was such a group. And there he was, dying with us at Zen Hospice. I was very proud of the fact that this fellow felt he could come to Zen Hospice and die the way he needed to die. And I asked him, I said, what do you think happens when you die? He said, nothing. I said, well, what kind of nothing? He said, nothing. And I said, well, like, do you smell things? Do you hear things? No, you don't have a nose, you don't have ears. And I said, well, help me understand what this nothing is. Is it like a dial tone, And he said, no, it's like nothing. He said, all your molecules go out and mix with all the other molecules in the universe. And that's how it is. I said, oh, that kind of nothing. Oh, okay. I thought he was going to be just fine, And, then there's this father and this son, who I meet in the mission, and I'm called to their house because they both have AIDS, father and the son. And they're in twin beds in the same room being cared for by Agnes, the son's mother and the father's husband. But several months before, the father had disowned his son because his son told him he was gay and he had HIV. Yeah. Now here they were together in the same room, both living and dying with AIDS. You can't go into that room with any kind of ideas about how they're supposed to do it. Best you can do is listen, really listen. So they taught me to listen well. Yeah. It's not so different than you and I talking, John.
A couple of beautiful lines. You say, I've got many tools, but when I go and I sit with the dying, I don't bring out the tools because either they or I will almost certainly trip over them. I lead with my humanity.
Yeah. I mean, we all got our tools. We got our, psychological, medical tools. We got our Zen tools, and we got them, ready to take out an emergency, and it's good to have tools. It's good to know something about the territory, but I like what you just said, I lead with my humanity because that's what, that's what we're meeting there. We're meeting each other in our humanity. Yeah. And we don't know how it's going to be. There was a guy, one of the early patients. I met him in a psychiatric unit at San Francisco General. He was referred to our hospice, and I went in, and he was facing toward the wall, very depressed. And I went in, I pulled up my little chair, sit next to him at the bed, and I just sat there a long time in silence. More time passed, he didn't acknowledge me. And then finally he kind of looked over his shoulder and he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Frank, I'm from the Zen Hospice Project." And he said, "Nobody's ever sat this long with me in silence before here." I said, "Well, we get a lot of practice at silence. You want to come live with us?" And he said, "Yeah." That was the end of the admissions interview, And he told me during that interview that, because I asked him, I said, "What do you want?" And he said, "Spaghetti." And I said, "Oh, spaghetti." I said, "We make really good spaghetti. You could come to our house, And when he arrived at the hospice, we had a big bowl of spaghetti waiting for him. You understand? Because that meant nurturance and familiarity and family. And, he ate the spaghetti, it was good spaghetti, but it wasn't that great, This guy wanted to take his life because he couldn't imagine any future of dignity in his life. And this was long before the laws had changed in Oregon and in California and elsewhere in the United States. But Derek Humphreys had written a book, How to Take Your Life When You Have Terminal Illness. And this guy wanted the book. And so I said, okay. And I got him the book. And every night I'd read a chapter to him, because sometimes you got to go to the darkest places to find what heals. Yeah. And so I'd read him a chapter, and I'd read him a chapter. And after a week or two of this, he said, "Frank, I really want to thank you." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I'm happier now than I've ever been." And I said, "Oh, bullshit." I said, "Just a few weeks ago, you wanted to kill yourself because you couldn't walk in the park and write in your diaries. What was that all about?" This is how I am with people. And he said, "Oh, that was just chasing desire." This was a guy who'd lived on the streets of San Francisco. He wasn't a Zen student. We never taught him to meditate. That was just chasing desire. So what do you mean? He said, "Now my pleasure comes from the coolness of the breeze and the softness of the sheets." I thought that was a remarkable turnaround for a guy I met in a psychiatric unit, And we never taught him Buddhism or to meditate or any of those things. It's just that the dying process has this way of stripping us of all our form, all the ways we've defined ourselves, all the roles we've carried. They're all either stripped away by illness or they're gracefully given up, but they all go. And then what do we find? We find something more fundamental in ourselves, as he did. And I have confidence in that. I have confidence in that. Yeah.
Another story, one of the most moving stories that I've heard you tell, was about walking in and greeting a young boy that had just died. Could you share that story with us?
Well, it's hard, John, because yes, it's a story that's written in the book, and yes, I can tell it like a story, but I knew this boy, and he still lives with me. And so when I share it with you, I live it again. His father called me. I was at the hospice and doing a myriad of things that you do when you run a hospice, and phone rang, I picked it up, and he said, "We understand that you could help us keep our son at home when he dies." And I said, "Yeah, I could do that. I could help you with that." I said, "You just call me, and I'll try and help." We talked a little more. He said, "But no, you don't understand." I said, "What?" And he said, "He's just died. He died half an hour ago." I said, "Oh boy. All right, I'll come there." So I drove up to their house. They lived in the countryside a little bit. And I remember walking into this house. His little brother answered the door, and I walked in the house, and he brought me to the room where Jamie was. And I went in the room, and there was Mom and Dad and Jamie in the bed. And I think maybe a neighbor or a friend. And so I followed my intuition, which is what I trust. And I went over to Jamie, and I leaned over and I kissed him on the forehead. And when I did that, the whole room broke into tears. Because even though they had loved him unbelievably, nobody had touched him since he died. And so his mom and his dad and I sat down, and we talked about how in lots of traditions across the world, for hundreds of years, people have bathed the body as a way to honor it and care for it and help it make the journey between worlds. And so we talked about how we might do that and what parts of it they might like to add. And so we got towels and washcloths, and they were great gardeners. And they went out to the garden and they picked, rose petals and sweet herbs. And we made this basin of water with the flowers and the herbs in it. And then we started this process of bathing his body. I didn't know how it would be. I had never done it with a young boy before. But I remember this mom, she started at the top of his head, and she washed down the back of his body. And there were scratches and abrasions, and every time she came to one of these, she just took care of it with so much love, so much care. And for the dad, it was so hard for him. He all he could do was look out the window to the garden. That was the best. That was his way of staying in the room. And his mom, she got to his feet and she washed his feet and she counted his toes. She said she'd done that when he was born. And then she washed up the front of his body, and sometimes she'd have to just stop and weep. And I wasn't there to answer any questions. My job was to hand her another washcloth and send her back to her son, into the suffering, really, which is where the healing's always found, isn't it? And when she got to his face, it was so tender between them, And there was nothing keeping them apart. They were like one being, maybe like, the moms who are on this call will understand this about what it's like when you have a newborn and you're nursing your newborn and you feel like you're one being for a while. That for that child, there isn't a distinction between the mother and child. The mother's the first face of God, And that's what it was like between them, this unbelievable intimacy. And Father would have to, in the process, they'd stop and tell me stories and help me to know about him. And it was a way of them getting current with what had happened, And in the end, we stopped and we dressed him in his Mickey Mouse pajamas, and his brothers and sisters came in the room, and we made a mobile out of it. He liked to make model airplanes, I remember. So we made a mobile out of all these model airplanes that he had made, and he hung it over his bed so that his siblings could have something else to do. We need something to do sometimes. And a little while later, I left. And I went home to my own son, who was very young at the time, about the same age as Jamie, and I held him very tightly that night. I felt great gratitude for his health that night. Yeah. So when I share something like this, first of all, it moved me just to think of them again, hold them in my heart again. And what it shows me is how remarkable people are, how they can rise to unbelievable conditions and find their way into them and through them. And I've seen this 1,000 times, how people find their way. And sometimes all they need is somebody who's willing to stay in the room when the fire's really hot. Yeah. And often I felt like that was my primary job. Just don't leave. Stay in the room.
You write that dying is messy, that it's hard. It's hard to die, and it leaves skid marks in relationships. And you have a really touching story about the founding of the Zen Hospice Project, and a brother and a sister who, when they were young, were orphans, essentially. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I call them Travis and Blaze in the book. It's different than their real names, but Blaze was the first person we brought to the Zen Center. We had a volunteer hospice program which was working in the community and SRO hotels and that kind of stuff. And then there was this woman that I met at San Francisco General, and she needed a place to live and die. And so I talked to the then director of Zen Center, and I said, can I just bring her home, And I was like a kid with a puppy, or something, I don't know. And we brought her back to Zen Center, moved her up to the 3rd floor, and we didn't have much of a hospice program by then, but we just took care of her. And I would go down to the dining room and find Zen students who were eating. And I'd say, you want to learn how to be with someone who's dying? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd bring them upstairs and I'd put them in the room with her. And she taught them, actually. And she was very comforted because she had cancer. And so as a result of chemotherapy and radiation, she'd lost most of her hair. And she thought this was a place where lots of people with cancer were living because everybody was bald, And anyhow, I hung out with her a lot, and she'd say, Frank, some of these people that come in the room and they tell me, just love, Frank, just love, Blaze, just love. And other people come in the room and they say, just let go, Blaze, just let go, And she said to me, Frank, what do I do first, love or let go? And I said, oh, you're going to know. I said, you'll figure it out. And she had a brother, and they had been orphaned when they were kids. They lived in foster homes and orphanages and horrible conditions, actually. And her brother rode the rodeo circuit. And so somehow we got a hold of him. I can't remember all the details, but we got a hold of him. And one night he showed up at the door of San Francisco Zen Center with this big 10-gallon hat and silver belt buckle and snakeskin boots, and we opened the door, and here's this guy, and he said, what kind of a place is this? You got my sis, like that, And I said, come on in, come on in. And we went upstairs, and I was going to tell him about his sister, and he couldn't go in the room, it was too much. And so I said, well, we'll give you a bed. You sleep here tonight. We'll talk tomorrow. He didn't go in the room. And next day we were in the courtyard at Zen Center smoking cigarettes and talking, and everybody was a little askance, but I just listened. And at one point he says to me, John, I want to tell her it, but I can't tell her it. And I was like, what now, And I said, well, I said, you haven't got a lot more time, Travis. I said, so if there's something you want to tell her, now's the time to tell her. I can't tell her. And I said, well, you tell it to me then. And he began to roll out this story, this horrible story of their lives and all the awful things that had happened to them and all the awful things he had done to her. He'd abused her in all kinds of ways. And I thought, oh my, I'm not a priest. How can I take this? What do I do with all this? And then I said, come on, let's go upstairs and see your sis. And we went upstairs and he pulled up a chair next to her bed and he basically said the same thing to her. He said, you know, I want to tell you, but I can't, you know, I'm no good with words. I can't find the words. And she did the most amazing things. She held up her hand like this and she said, in this place, I have someone who feeds me. I have someone who bathes me. I'm surrounded by love. There is no blame. Wow. Wow. I mean, in that moment, the whole lifetime was forgiven. It didn't condone any of the things that happened. It wasn't like they were all okay. None of that. It wasn't about that. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't about condoning. It was just forgiveness, which Stella understood to mean that she was going to die and she didn't want to carry this with her anymore. She wanted to set down this old pain. And so she taught me about love and letting go. Yeah. We went out to Green Gulch Farm. I remember when we had after she died and we had interned her ashes in the Green Gulch Garden. Wendy Johnson was there. We learned a lot about interning ashes. Stella was too hot for the garden. Those lilies that we planted above her ashes didn't survive, actually. But we had a little retreat, memorial service for her there in the Wheelwright Center. And on the way out to the Green Gulch, we stopped for a bottle of gin. Travis drank most of it on the way out, you know. And anyway, all the volunteers were there talking about his sister and how wonderful she was and how much they loved her. And in addition to the gin, he bought a dozen roses or so. And he went around to each of the volunteers and he said, some of these roses, well, they're for gratitude. Some of these roses, well, they're for love. And some of these roses, well, they're just roses. You know? And I thought we'd had some kind of Zen influence on him, you know, over the period of weeks. Anyway, these are the people I lived with and learned from, and they're my teachers. And I'm inordinately grateful for what they showed me about living a life of integrity and not waiting and telling the people you love that you love them. And so I'm ever thankful to them. Yeah.
Another teacher of yours, Stephen Levine, who you dedicated the book to, among other folks. Could you tell us about your relationship with him and how you learned from him, perhaps?
Oh, he's a character. Stephen was a real character, and I loved him dearly. I still love him. And he's been dead for a few years now. And when my son was being born, we lived in the country. We were kind of hippies, and I was reading a lot of Kubler-Ross in those days, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And anyway, I had the chance came to come up and to see her, and so I went to study with her for a little bit. And in those days, her retreats were mostly people who were dying or had traumatic losses, etc. And anyway, I studied with Elizabeth, and she was remarkable. And she's the one that sent me to Stephen, actually. And anyway, I went to Stephen's programs and we got to be friendly, and anyway, I love him, and but we also had a very honest relationship. And when I was a boy, without going into a long story, young boy, I went through a lot of sexual abuse with a priest in my parish, and you don't need to know about all that, but as a young boy, I conflated that kind of pedophilia and abuse with homosexuality, and I didn't really understand it then. Anyways, it just stayed with me without much exploration, honestly. And then later, Stephen, this was just at the beginning, before we knew what to call the AIDS crisis. Stephen said, well, you know, there's this new disease, Frank, and he says, affecting a lot of men in the gay community, and you know, maybe you should go work with them. And you know, he's my teacher, and then I got so angry. I was so angry from all this old trauma came up in me, and I just grabbed Stephen, you know, like, and I put him against a wall, actually. And I said, you son of a bitch, you're going to send me back into hell. And that's really how I thought about it. It was wrong thinking, but it's how I thought about it at the time. And I was very, you know, it was distorted thinking on my part. And I just held him there, you know, like, and then, of course, while I was holding him there, practically his feet off the ground, I realized, oh, he's right. You know, son of a bitch, he's right. He's gonna send me exactly where I need to go. And I set him down, and he laughed, of course, and like a really old Zen story, except it was happening in contemporary times, you know. And you know, then I started working with. I worked as a night attendant, you know, working with people from midnight to 8 in the morning, you know, the lonely hours. Yeah. And then it was from that we started Zen Hospice. Stephen was a good friend, and he came to Zen Hospice a lot to tea. He was dear to me. And before he died, they lived way up in the mountains, you know, and outside of Taos. And I called him up, and he said, I said, I'm here, I'm in Santa Fe. He said, you come on up. And he never invited anybody up to his house. And anyway, I went up, and he and Andrea and I, his wife, spent the day together. And Andrea was going to drive me back down the mountain. And I got in the truck, and I said, wait a minute, hold on. And I got out of the truck, went back to Stephen. I said, we're not going to see each other again, are we? He said, no. I knew he was coming close to the end of his life. And so we did vows and held each other a lot. And then that was the last time I saw him. And I'm ever grateful to him for everything he showed me. He showed me how to have courage and not to be afraid of suffering, how to go towards suffering, how to find the healing in suffering. Stephen taught me that. And boy, he was a tough but good teacher to me. Yeah. Anyway, I'm telling too many stories here, John.
I love those stories.
Maybe, well, yeah, but I also want to talk to the people who are on the call. I want to have a dialogue with the people on the call.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I thought
I'd see what's on their hearts and minds. Yeah.
If it's okay, sorry? Frank, is to open it up to Allison and John Tarrant, and then we'll open it up to everyone else.
Okay, great. Good.
Yeah.
Oh, what fun.
And after this, we'll encourage everyone to put up your golden paw there, and we'll call on you and just have a dialogue after Allison and John.
Oh, I'm glad to be able to talk to Allison and John. What's up for you all? What's on your hearts and minds? I'm curious how this is landing for you both. Allison?
Well, John was recently in the hospital a couple of weeks ago, and we spent a lot of time with him there. And I was very interested in something you wrote about waiting, how waiting is, you don't really, how waiting holds within it some kind of refusal in a way to enter the moment that you're in. And waiting for a better outcome, waiting for a better nurse to show up, waiting for the vomiting to stop, waiting for the pain medication to start working, or all of those things are preventing me or in the way from simply being with the person, which is the healing balm. And you wrote this great line, which I'm going to read. And you write, the experience of non-waiting is more like continuous contact with reality. I thought that was so beautiful, the idea of non-waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, this is how our practice can help us sometimes, and that's a way that it can, I mean, it's full of expectation waiting, right? Waiting for the next moment to arrive. We missed this one. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, Allison, I've been with families who their loved one is dying and they're looking at the monitor, watching that line go up and down, waiting for the flat line to happen that they saw on TV somewhere. And, and I have to redirect them sometimes to the person instead of the monitor. And it can happen for medical professionals too. We get so invested in our machinery that, we're trying to anticipate the next moment. Some of that's useful, but yeah, it's not the same as patience, is it? Which is a kind of open welcoming of the way things are right now. Even if they suck, even if they're terrible. Yeah. What helped you to not wait?
Well, that wasn't even a question. I just simply noticed that everything, I think, because of the kind of intensity of the situation, and also the helplessness that defeated any of the expectations. But more than that, it was simply more just a feeling of intimacy.
Yeah.
It's a continual feeling of intimacy, and waiting just doesn't arise in the mind if I have my hands close on the moment and the person I'm with.
Yeah. That's a beautiful way to describe it. It's a kind of intimacy, right? With the person, with the moment, with yourself, right? And then things are free to show themselves, right? We're not imposing the future or the past on this moment, right? We're not, oftentimes I feel like when we look for something in our past and we try to drag it in to the present moment and we lay it on top of the present moment, it almost does violence to the present moment. It feels that way to me sometimes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I felt that. I absolutely felt that there was a violence to it. And it was a very aggressive move, and also internally aggressive to not feel whatever the thing I was trying to push away was actually inside my own being. Just seemed to be appearing out in the world, but actually was in here.
Sure. Yeah, and it's understandable. It's scary. It's, oh my God, what can I do here? The helplessness that you described, and sometimes we can just be swept away by it. Of course, it's natural. But in other traditions, helplessness is it's a gateway to humility. That's a good quality to have, whether we're the person in the bed or the person sitting next to the person in the bed. Yeah. Beautiful. Jon, I see your head moving up and down sometimes, and I'm curious to know what's on your heart and mind. And I'm so grateful for you.
Yeah, I'm feeling really moved hearing you talk, and it's been a long journey, and a beautiful thing. And the thing I was really touched by when Jon asked you a couple of times to talk about different people you'd sat with, or like the young boy his parents hadn't been able to touch you until, so the whole scene was frozen until it could begin to move, and the kindness would move, or the feeling of intimacy really would move it. And you said something that where you said, I'm not. You took a breath and said, well, to tell a story, I have to go there. I have to be. And I think that's such a true thing about doing any kind of work like this and how we are, that to be with someone, I have to really have them be inside into my heart and be with them. And so, and I just want to tell you, I'm very touched by that. And thank you. And how you don't hide that. I like that you don't hide that. You know, there's no way to decorate that story and not feel it and things like that. So, so I'm just touched by that. Yeah.
Thank you, Jon. Yeah, I mean, it can become a story, you know, it can just become a book and we can read it and tell it again to other people, but it's not
nice when it doesn't, you know.
Yeah.
It's real then. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, that's part of being human, is showing up real.
Yeah.
And not knowing what to do. You know, Bernie Glassman was an old friend and teacher, and I loved him dearly. And I loved his precept. You know, his first one was not knowing. And it was, you know, not knowing. That was the beginning of everything. You know, and it allows for the kind of openness, curiosity to emerge, wonder to emerge. You know, a sense of discovery to emerge. Yeah. And then things are free to show themselves and unfold and reveal what's needed. Yeah.
I think so. And I think it's, I don't know, there's an integrity in that. And I'm just saying, I feel that. And it's a nice thing to feel that when I feel you in that way. Thank you.
Yeah.
We don't have to decorate stuff, you know, it's just here, you know. So that's all. I know people are eager to get to you, and so I know, or to ask you questions. And then people have lost people recently on here, and there's all sorts of people with interesting or deep, profound questions. And I think you said you'd like to.
Yeah, I do. I want to have a bit of a dialogue with folks and just see how this is landing, where it's landing. Is it in their belly, or is it in their heart, or is it in their head? You know, and what's on their hearts and minds, you know? It doesn't have to be a question. It can just be something somebody wants to share. But we'll keep it brief so that as many people can share as possible, okay? So Jon, I can't, because of my vision, I can't see the thumbnail. So you call on somebody if they have their hand raised, and then we'll just have a little dialogue. We'll just inquire together. We'll explore together, okay? You don't have to have something all worked out.
Yeah, please put up your little golden paw, and we can call on you. And Frank really does want to interface with people.
If you don't know where it is, it's on. If you click on reactions, which is on your bottom of your screen, and then raise hand is one of the most prominent reactions. So.
Okay, I see. It looks like there's a couple of hands raised, Jon.
Yeah. We're so Michael Permeter. Yeah, could you unmute? There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you, Michael. There you go.
Can you hear me? Let me see if I can.
Yeah, I can. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Well, my mother died about 4 months ago. She was 104.
Wow.
And I've been here in Chicago for the past 3 years since the beginning of the pandemic. And towards the end, she fell and went into hospice, and I ended up being one of the caregivers for her, and all kinds of. It was just profound all that time. But now, you know, the intensity of the grief time is kind of healing that, settling it. And what I'm doing is going over the whole process and how a lot of the time when I had to make decisions, I wasn't really calm and centered. And I'm looking back thinking that if I knew now, if I understood what was happening, I would have, perhaps made different decisions in terms of helping her before she entered hospice. So it's kind of, I can't go into great detail. It's just a general.
Yeah, I got it. So how is it when?
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you replay like that, Michael,
Yeah.
Um, and if you were going to tell me on the replay what the tone of voice was of who was talking to you, what would you say about it?
I would say I'm not pleasing someone who's, I'm not really doing, the replay is, I know this guy or this person thinks I should have done something that I'm not doing.
Uh-huh.
Can't get to them, and they didn't come forward to let me know what it was.
Right.
And I have, but I feel I still have something to go through with that. Yeah, I need to be forgiven by them or something.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Missed the beat.
All right. So Michael, when let's keep it simple, okay? All of us have this internal standard bearer, let's call it, this part of our being that was always telling us to look both ways before you cross the street, and it's kind of the internal parent, let's call it that. I mean, we don't get psychological, but it also has a way that it thinks you should be. And it's a protective device. It protects our fragile ego, but it's very critical, actually. And sometimes it has really useful information to offer, Michael. Like, it knows you really well, and it might have something useful to offer, but what you don't need is the delivery system. You don't, like, I've been around some really wise people like Jon, and they've never, ever transmitted their wisdom to me with meanness.
Mm-hmm.
Never once. And so when you hear that tone of voice, that's not wisdom speaking, that's not wisdom speaking here. And so it helps you to identify it. And then actually you can stop the conversation. You can stand up for yourself. You can act on your own behalf and say, wait a minute, you've been telling me this shit for 40 years. Enough, find somebody else. Right now, I need to trust myself here. So that's the first thing, is that critical voice, where we have to stop it because it will stop all spiritual growth. It'll stop all inner growth. Until we learn to tame that inner voice, it's hard. And being mindful of it is not enough, actually. I think we actually have to stop we have to interact. It's a corrosive voice. And I think we have to interact with it and say, stop, and learn to stand up on our own behalf, So it's hard enough, right, that you went through this with your mom? I mean, wow.
Yeah.
It must have been challenging for you.
Well, I was like, it was more work than one caregiver at any one time around the clock could do.
That's right.
And all levels of
right, and that's how it is. That's how it is, and especially in this country. I don't know where your mom was, but in this country, we're leaning on families to do this kind of stuff that's impossible to do by yourself. We expect them to be able to do everything, and it's really hard. And you did the best you can do, and it's never enough, right? Not for this voice that's in there.
Right, exactly.
Right. So substitute this voice. Once in a while, let your mom speak. Like say, just stop the voice. Say, you be quiet for a minute. And Mom, what do you think? What do you think she'd say, Michael?
You asking me now then?
Yeah. If you asked your mom, how was my care for you? What would she say?
I think she'd say, at some point she said, what are you doing? And another point she says, she's having a phenomenal experience that she's going through. She went through so many amazing transformations.
Right. That was then, but now, if you're going to ask her now, Michael.
Oh, if I could ask her now.
Yeah, what do you think she'd say? We look back retrospectively.
Get a hold of yourself. She would say that comes to mind.
Uh-huh. Huh? Do you think she felt your love?
I think she'd say, yes, that she made clear. She made clear at one point, when I was comforting her when something else was being done for her, she made that. I come back to that experience often. Good. Information of love.
Good for you. Yeah. It's really important to hear that voice also. You might not be able to shut down the other one, but it's important to include Mom's voice as well.
Yeah. definitely.
Yes, that she says, yes, Michael, I
Mhm,
know you love me. I love you. However
mhm.
she would say it, you know?
That's it, yeah,
All right.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Maria, please.
Maria. Oh,
Thank
¿cómo
you.
estás, Maria?
Muy bien, Frank. It's so good
Oh,
to see you. It's always a joy.
good to be with you.
Yeah. So my question is related to a very close death I had recently. It's been not even a month, almost like 24, 25 days since my Nana passed.
Oh,
She's
your
the
Nana.
one who raised me. She lived with us here in Colombia, and she took care of me for 30 plus years. So she lived with us. She was the person who gave me support, love, care, company, safety in many, many levels. And she passed suddenly. She was in Bogota. I'm in Medellin. So I'm like wondering these kind of COVID deaths. So she was intubated. I got
Yeah.
to see her on video, like breathing, and
Yeah.
then I got to see her not breathing.
Yeah. Oh, stay right there, Maria. Stay right there. Don't talk over that. Let yourself feel that for a second. So you were trying to have this real relationship with your Nana, but you're doing it over a screen.
Yes.
And it feels a little, I don't know, what does it feel like when you're doing that?
Well, all these years that I've been training with you, this is like my 4th year. I've been
Uh-huh.
following you all over the world, and I was always very afraid of being in the moment of dying of a loved one. And in this time that I was not able to be there, all I wanted was to be there,
Yeah.
to hold that body,
Yeah.
to see that body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm traveling on a Saturday for like a 1 month memorial or
Uh-huh.
ceremony, where we're taking her ashes to the place where they will remain.
Yes.
So I'm going there and I won't see her. I'll see the ashes.
Ashes, yeah.
And I know there's a lot of processing that I need to do to come to terms. I've been working anyway. I've been following my life every day
Yeah.
and haven't been able to process like
Yeah.
depth of the grief. And
Yeah.
maybe it's because I don't know how to do it. I
Okay.
don't know how to go there
All
without
right.
crumbling and not being able to be functional.
Yeah. So I'm just struck by this image of you trying to connect with her over the screen, right? And maybe she's not able to speak, or it's difficult for her to speak, etc.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you a question right now, Maria. It's really important. Do you sense me now?
I do,
Can you feel me now?
very much.
Okay. Can you feel my love for you now?
I do, yes.
Don't just answer yes. Make sure it's true for you. Okay? All right. Do you think it might have been possible that your Nana felt your love like this, like we're feeling now?
Yes.
But you might not have been able to get back from her what you wanted or what you needed. The touch, the caressing of your cheeks, right? Whatever she did for you as a young girl. Yeah, that you miss. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm asking you these questions because I'm not trying to lead you. I just want you to know that there was a possibility that she could feel your love. Yeah. And the caress that you want on your cheek, or whoever she cared for you as a young one, this you have to grieve. And it won't just be sadness. And it won't just be about the past. It's also about, you know, my brother died, I told you, a few days ago. And what I'm aware of right now is not just what was had and lost, but what we didn't get to have. And so we lose something like the future, or a dream, or a possibility, that we grieve that too. Not just what we didn't get to have, but what we don't get to have. Okay? And this you know how to do, Maria. You know how to feel, and you know how to trust your good heart to be a reliable guide. It won't let you down. Your wise heart will not abandon you. Okay? John Tarrant, your mic isn't muted, so I'm just seeing you, not Maria. There we go. Okay. Maria, anything else?
Just thank you. Thank you
That's
so much.
enough for now. Okay. I love you very much. You take good care, huh?
Wait to see
And feel all of it as much as you can. And it doesn't all have to be felt at once. And sometimes it will feel like sadness, and sometimes it'll feel like fear, and sometimes it'll feel like numbness. And those are all the many faces of grief. You know that. We've talked about this before. So, and talk to her a lot. Talk to Nana a lot. Doesn't mean you're crazy.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Okay, John. I don't know who's next.
Sandra, please unmute yourself.
Sandra, okay.
Yes, thank you. Hello. I lost my husband 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He died of cancer.
Uh-huh.
He was diagnosed with, the first diagnosis he had was stage 4. And we quickly learned that stage 5 was death.
Yeah.
And the doctors gave him 4 months to live when they diagnosed him, and he lived for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
That was Jim. And we were incredibly close. And what came to mind, I've had so many challenges since losing him. And I think my greatest challenge is feeling whole again.
Mm.
He made me feel completely whole.
Mm.
And I'm just wondering if you have any words about that.
Oh boy. Well, sometimes that's how we view our relationships, how we experience our relationship, as coming together and feeling a certain wholeness with a partner, like you're describing. And so, you know, you might be missing that. You might feel like you don't have a right arm or a left leg or something like that. You know, it might just feel like that sometimes. Yeah. Like, how do I do this? How do I function in the world? You know, and I'm gonna guess now, Sandra, that sometimes it's like this, that you don't, tell me your husband's name again.
Jim.
Jim, thank you. You don't just lose Jim once. You keep losing him. You know, when you get into bed at night and the sheets are cold, you miss him again, you lose him again, right? When you have to do something that he did, you know, whether it was, you know, some task or something you love to do together, you miss him again, you lose him again. And so it's not a single experience. It's multiple times we have this feeling of losing someone. Yeah. And there's another kind of hole that happens. And it's like a hole in our belly in a certain way. It feels like that in a way. And so what happens is we keep trying to fill that hole with something. Cheeseburgers, friends, golden retrievers, whatever we got, right? And part of the work, I think, and particularly those of us who practice, part of the work is to let ourselves feel the whole and not try and fill it. And first it will feel vast and too big, and we just get scared of it, understandable. Okay, that's enough for today then. And then you go back to it and you feel it some more, and you feel this whole until what happens is the thing that you're most missing starts to emerge in the whole. And it isn't really Jim. It's the wholeness of you. That, yeah, of course you want Jim back. Of course you want him back. But there's another kind of whole here that's important to pay attention to, and it's to let yourself feel into that whole. Until what starts to happen is in the middle of that emptiness, in the middle of that just sense of loss, something else starts to emerge, something that is reliable for you, that you can count on, and it's a part of you that's already whole, intrinsically whole. Yeah? And that can start to show up, and that's one of the things that happens in the process of grief, is we rediscover ourselves, or rediscover the deepest parts of ourselves that allow us to continue and go through our lives, not forgetting the person that we love, but bringing them with us everywhere. Yeah? So that our experience of them isn't only that a sense of loss, but a sense of like, oh, I want you to know how that I've discovered something about me, and now because of that, I can bring you with me wherever I go. Yeah. So let yourself feel it. Yeah, does that make sense to you at all?
It makes total sense.
Okay, good, good. I'm glad. And I won't say more. That's good.
And I completely understand how when I have that sense of wholeness, then I can bring him along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As opposed to looking for him everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And thinking that he's filling the hole. You know, I get,
Exactly.
I got it.
Exactly. You got it?
I got it. Thank you
Way to
so
go.
much. Now I
You're
just
very
have to
good.
do it.
Yeah, well, kindly, slowly. The
Okay.
willingness to, love is a tremendous support for us, but love can also dissolve things into emptiness. We're going to use that term, emptiness. And then love is the very force that allows things for form to take shape out of that emptiness. It's the force of love that allows us to do it. So when you rediscover yourself, then you can bring him with you. You won't be looking for him to fill something.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take good care. Bye.
Thank you.
Amy.
Wow. Okay, John, I don't know. Oh, and Sandra, you have to mute it. Oh, you have it. Okay.
We have one more, if that's okay, Frank. Amy
Yeah,
has
it's
a
fine.
question.
John, I have no sense of time because of my strokes. Okay. And so you'll have to tell me when we're supposed to end. I don't know.
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, fine. All right, so who was going to speak?
Amy.
Amy.
Hi.
Okay. Hi,
Hello.
Amy.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
I'm loving being here with you. Really, I wouldn't do it otherwise. Honestly.
Beautiful.
I'm really
I'm loving this too.
Okay, what's on your heart?
I have this question about the grief for what can't get expressed while we're alive.
Yeah.
My parents are very old, so I'm in daily communication with my brother. And I have one brother. And we're very good. We're very good. A very good tag team with caring for our parents. My dad's 90. Our dad is 97, and mom is 92. And
wow.
They're still able to live independently because I'm there providing a lot of care and a lot of emotional support. And my brother is a doctor, so when there are medical things that need to happen, he's good at that piece.
Okay. So what's this part about expressing, not being able to express?
So the problem is that I feel with my brother like there's a shell around my heart, and I want to say I love you to him, and I'm afraid it's going to make him uncomfortable. And that I'm going to be too much for him. And this is a really important relationship for me. So I don't want to regret that we couldn't have that
Yeah.
easier connection, because it always feels kind of tense.
So have you tried?
I mean, I've said I love you, and I've said love you, or stuff like that, and he doesn't say anything, and sometimes I'm not sure that it's his language.
Yeah, may not be.
So
So
yeah.
so what about if you were really specific with him about loving him? Like he's a doc, right?
Yeah.
So he does stuff,
Yeah.
right? And he likes doing stuff well, I bet.
Yeah.
Speculate. So suppose you love him and say, I really love that you do that so well. I love that you, when there's an emergency about our parents or there's some question that I don't know what to do with, you seem to be able to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I love that about you.
Yeah. I do all that stuff. I do.
Okay. And he doesn't get overwhelmed? He doesn't run away?
He likes it.
Aha! Great. Wonderful. Swell. Oh, good. You found the door. You found the gate. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And it just, people need to be loved in different ways.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And they have different language for it.
Yeah.
And so you got to sometimes you got to find their language.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And it won't necessarily be yours at the get-go, but I'm sure those things can blend a little bit,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
tell
like
me,
that.
practice with me. What do you love about him?
Oh, he's got incredible integrity. He's a man of his word. He doesn't, no bullshit. Like, if you need him, he's there for you. He's very, very responsible, reliable.
Okay. And what do you love about that? What's the effect of that on you?
He's got my back. I know that if I was in trouble, he'd be there for me.
So it's some trust that you have in him.
Big trust.
Big trust.
And both ways. Yeah. We do trust each other.
That's an incredible foundation for relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of a basic trust that we have as human beings, that, we close our eyes, we trust they'll open again, we trust the sun will come up in the morning. And that's really important for getting through life, but sometimes it gets messed with in our lives. And so a lot of us don't have it. And so it's amazing to me that you two have it with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true.
And just, I was just with my eldest brother, and he tends to be more transactional in his relationship. So I said to him the other day, I said, you tend to be more transactional, and I tend to be I noticed that I'm a little bit more emotional and relational. And I get that could be, I don't want to impose that on you. That could be hard. And I think it's just great what you're doing. And I'm so grateful that you did this. And I'm so grateful that you did that. And I love that you did that. And sometimes I wish I could just share with you about how much I miss our brother. And he said, I can't do anything about your feelings. And I said, I don't need you to do anything about him. I just want to share with the one person who I know knew him. Yeah. And he said, oh, okay, I could do that. And it was non-threatening. He didn't have to do anything then, that he didn't know how to do or didn't feel comfortable doing, etc. So just keep, finding each other's language. It's really important,
Yeah.
And in the beginning, you'll trip on each other. But have you ever traveled in a third world country or a place where you didn't speak the language? Right, so you stumble along, right? And you make gestures, but you find a way in because there's a genuine wish to connect.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know each other's language, you find a way to in. And that, you know how to do that. And so you can have confidence in that. And because there's this basic trust that exists between you, that's a place that can be acknowledged and reflected. Somebody, you can hold a mirror to that in him.
It's beautiful.
That basic goodness in him. Yeah.
Beautiful.
That maybe looks different, than you, but it's okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Hope it goes well with your mom and dad.
Thank you. One day at a time,
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, John.
Yeah. Well, John Terrence and Allison Atwill, do you have any closing thoughts or words?
I noticed that Kelly from Ladakh was on, but I don't think we have time, perhaps.
I'm okay with it taking more time, but I just don't want to hold your people up. Is there someone else that wanted to say something and didn't get to?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Frank. I just greetings from Ladakh in the Himalayas in the morning.
Oh, wonderful.
And I just so admire, admire isn't the right word. What a gift your life has been to have these experiences of being with death and grief. And my experience has been, and it, you know, kind of surprises people at times, but I find grief to be the most powerful gift that I've been able to experience in life. I was able to hold my mother as she died in bed, and holding my brother who died of AIDS. I had been his caretaker for his last year, and so we had hospice. But the things you expressed and others expressed here, and that I remember that the hole, you know, the dark hole in my stomach, and treasuring it because that's what I had left.
Yeah.
You know, that's what was real. And the other parts of grief that are so fascinating to me is that they're not, they're pure. You know, so much of it is not triggered by thought. It's just this, you know, body, visceral, you know, pure response to the present. It's just fascinating. And
it's beautiful the way you're talking about it. I love that you're bringing in the body, actually, Kelly, because, you know, we think of grief as just an emotional experience, and it's not just that. It's a body experience. I'm convinced that grief is a bodily experience more and more, you know, and we're very rarely directed in that way. We you know, we have support groups where we talk about our feelings, or we see a therapist, all of which is fine, but there's a physical experience to grief, isn't there? Yeah,
very much so.
Yeah.
And I just briefly wanted to share, when after my mother died, I had always known that she wanted her body washed, that she wanted a handmade wooden coffin made with barn boards and be planted on the hill, and an oak tree planted over her. So when she died, you know, I'm trying to get my siblings, okay, we need to bathe her, and nobody wanted to. And she was very, very Catholic. And she had gallons and gallons of holy water. So I thought, well, I might as well use this, you know. And I invited anybody to help me. And my 13-year-old niece said, yeah, I'll do it with you. I said, great. So I'm handing her, you know, dish rags and some of the holy water. And I said, no, wash between her toes. And she said, well, they're not going to pop off, are they? You know, just the pure presence, you know, of an unknowing. But it was what a gift for her to have passed through that kind of processing, and how each grief has been so completely different for me, each person in my life, and how the process of bathing her and being with her dead body in the same room for 3 days or nights, it changed the whole process of her grief. I mean, of the grief for me with her compared to others. So I just find it such a gift for me.
Well, you know, it's you can only someone who's been in the middle of it or has been through it can say that word. It's a gift. If you tell somebody else it's a gift when they're just starting on their grief, they'll slap you with a wet fish, you know, and rightly so, you know, because it's just, we're going to go through this in our way, but it is very human to grieve. We can say that it's very human to grieve, and we will do it in lots of different ways. And there's no right way. There's only your way. Yeah. So I'm glad you had this experience with your mom, and it differs from the other experiences you had. And so the grief is different, of course. Yeah, of course. And someone said recently to me in a program, I don't know who it was, but they said, sometimes grief is love that has no place to go. Sometimes grief is a love that has no place to go. You know, we're used to sharing it with our loved ones, or the one that's gone now, for example. And, you know, I feel that today. I feel that with my brother. Sometimes I feel this, oh, I wish I could, you know, but I'm finding my way with it. I'm finding my way. Thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you,
John.
Thank you, Frank, so much. It's just so touching, and you know, we're just honored to have you here, and the love that you radiate is amazing. We'd like to end with the 4 vows, if that's okay, and to dedicate those vows to your brother Mark.
Oh, that would be generous of you. Thank you very much.
You know, so
Go ahead, John. Why don't you lead them?
we'll actually we have Jordan McConnell, a guitarist, who will play them for us.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
I vow to wake all the beings of the world. I vow to set endless heartache to rest. I vow to walk through every wisdom gate. I vow to live the great Buddha way. I vow to wake all the beings of the world. I vow to set endless heartache to rest. I vow to walk through every wisdom gate. I vow to live the great Buddha way. I vow to wake all the beings of the world. I vow to set endless heartache to rest. I vow to walk through every wisdom gate. And I vow to live the great Buddha way.
Well, thank you, Frank, and thank you, John Tarrant, and thank you, Allison and Jordan, and thank all of you for coming and sharing these, the most important things in our lives together. And it's a wonderful thing. So we have lots of things going on at pacificzen.org. Please check it out, and love to see you again. Thank you, Frank.